I'm Barry Tramel, and I say OU fans may not want it to happen immediately, but very soon it's time for the Missouri Tigers to start stepping up in the Big 12 Conference.
Well, they're going to have to because we're losing a Nebraska team that looks like it's on the rise. From the Opopco Studios in Oklahoma City, you're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenni Carlson. Barry, we are going to lose Nebraska out of the Big 12, and so there is going to be that lack of a really marquee team in the North, or what was formerly the North. You think Missouri might get to that point?
I don't see why not. I think most of the Big 12 North squads, Kansas State, Iowa State, they're just going to get avalanched. Basically, the North is joining the Big 12 South is what's going to happen. They're playing Texas, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, Baylor every year instead of just 3 of those 6. But Missouri is the one team that can handle it. The Tigers have gotten much better under Gary Pinkel. Between 1983, when Warren Powers was fired, and 2001, when Gary Pinkel was hired, Missouri had 2 winning seasons. Since then, Pinkel has elevated the Missouri program. It's become very competitive. They won the North twice. I think going into Texas multiple times a year to play, I think they can increase their Texas recruiting. Missouri's obviously become a quarterback good school. You know, Brad Smith, Chase Daniel, now Blaine Gabbert, one good quarterback after another. And this year, Missouri's playing defense. I think Missouri is poised to really make a sort of a stand in the Big 12.
Well, and you know, when there was talk of Missouri wanting to go to the Big 10, they were the first team to jump out there and say, we might be looking at moving. I was really surprised by that, if for no other reason than for years and years and years, Missouri tried to build football by going and recruiting in the Big 10 country. That's where they're closest to. Geographically, it makes sense, but it didn't pay dividends. They could never get a foothold when they were recruiting against Iowa, against Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State. They could never make inroads there. They got a few players here and there, but never that consistent flow of players that they needed. Then they started looking at Texas, started getting some guys, and when they were thinking about moving to the Big 10, you lose that recruiting ground, Barry. I think now they can continue to go there to get those players and build this program. I don't know if I'm ready to buy, though, that they could be one of the really great programs in the Big 12. I think they're still a ways away from that.
Well, they're a long ways from competing with Oklahoma and Texas, but I think they're poised to challenge for that number 3 spot. And frankly, if you're the number 3 school in your conference, then you're in pretty good shape. What Missouri's got to do is start knocking off the Sooners and the Longhorns every once in a while. Gary Pinkel is 0 for Texas and 0 for Oklahoma. It's not his fault. Missouri's about that too. Since 1970, Missouri is 1-11 against Texas, 3-31 against Oklahoma. So they've got to turn that around. But I don't see why Missouri couldn't slide into that number 3 spot. They'll be competing with Oklahoma State for that. They'll be competing with Tech for that if Tommy Tuberville gets things going. They'll be competing with A&M for that if A&M ever gets going. But I think Missouri is probably in the best shape to do that.
Well, and I think, you know, Missouri being the only really big-time football school in the state of Missouri, they can recruit from the Kansas City area, they can recruit from the St. Louis area. I've always been surprised that they haven't been better football-wise just because of that. Now, those aren't 2 super fantastic recruiting areas, but they're not that bad either. They do have some talent in those 2 areas, and Missouri's just never been able to, again, get a foothold on long-term sustained success in football. So I think if they can maybe capitalize on the fact that Kansas isn't all that great, Kansas State still trying to rebuild, Nebraska leaves, you know, maybe some kids that would have said, I'd rather play in the Big 12, maybe now those guys might look more at Missouri. Missouri's got a great opportunity here, and I tell you what would kickstart it, Barry, is if they beat the Sooners on Saturday. That would be a really big statement moving forward. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think you think it's going to happen. But I will say that would be a huge statement, and we'll have to see what happens on Saturday. Stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.